An Introduction to 1 Samuel. In the original Hebrew canon, 1st and 2nd Samuel were one volume. The writing is attributed to the prophets Samuel, Gad, and Nathan, Samuel penning the first 24 chapters. 1 Samuel covers a period of just over 100 years, from about 1180 to 1078 BCE, roughly when the writing was completed. The book is largely about four leaders in Israel: High Priest Eli, the prophet Samuel, King Saul, and David. In chapter 1, a barren woman named Hannah begs Jehovah for a son, promising to devote him to God's service. God answers her prayer. When her child Samuel is weaned, she places him in the care of High Priest Eli in Shiloh. In chapter 3, Jehovah tells young Samuel to deliver a judgment message against Eli's house because he has failed to rebuke his wicked sons. In chapter 4, Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant at Israel's army camp and slay Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. When 98-year-old Eli hears the news, he falls backward and dies. In chapters 5 through 7, the Philistines return the ark to Israel after suffering a series of heavy punishments from Jehovah. In the next chapter, the Israelites faithlessly demand a king. In chapter 9, Jehovah tells Samuel to anoint Saul of the tribe of Benjamin as leader of Israel. Chapter 11 shows that Saul starts out well, but before long he becomes disobedient. In chapter 13, he presumptuously offers up a burnt sacrifice. In chapter 15, he defeats the Amalekites, but disobediently spares King Agag and the best of the herd and the flock. To obey is better than a sacrifice, Samuel says. He then tells Saul that God has rejected him from being king. In chapter 16, Samuel anoints David, a son of Jesse, to be the next king. In the next chapter, David, with just a sling and a stone, kills the giant Goliath, a champion of the Philistines. Chapter 18 records the start of a lifelong friendship between David and Saul's son Jonathan. Seeing David's courage, Saul puts him in charge of the fighting men. David's campaigns are so successful that he receives more praise than Saul, who becomes filled with murderous envy. In chapter 19, David flees for his life, remaining a fugitive until Saul's death. Did you know? 1 Samuel has valuable lessons about faith and obedience. Eli and Saul disobeyed Jehovah and came to a tragic end. Samuel and David, however, served God faithfully from their youth, thus enjoying his blessing throughout their lives. In chapters 24 and 26, David has opportunities to kill Saul, but he refuses to harm Jehovah's anointed. In chapter 25, Samuel dies, and all Israel mourns. David, now in the wilderness of Paran, sends 10 of his young men to a wealthy sheep owner called Nabal to ask for provisions. When Nabal insolently refuses to help, David prepares to take revenge. However, Nabal's wife, Abigail, quickly goes to David with provisions and averts tragedy. In chapter 31, 1 Samuel closes with the death of Saul and 3 of his sons, who are buried under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh Gilead. As you read 1 Samuel, Note how Eli and Saul brought disgrace upon themselves. See why Jehovah loved Samuel and David. And read how God built for David a lasting house, which eventually led to the Messiah, the King of God's kingdom.